The neighbors in Abu Ney could no longer ignore the whispers. Every day, a faint cry was heard from Aunt Mariam's home, followed by silence, and each time those cries became harder to forget. One fateful afternoon, a neighbor finally saw Amina. She was lying on the cold floor, frail, pale, and too weak to stand. It was clear something was terribly wrong. How could a child suffer like this? Before we dive deeper, if stories of resilience and hope inspire you, follow along for an unforgettable journey of courage. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep these stories of bravery alive. In the quiet city of Abu Ney, a young girl named Amina faced challenges no child should ever encounter. At just 7 years old, Amina was a joyful girl with a love for reading and learning. Her parents, hopeful for a brighter future, made the difficult decision to go abroad in search of better work. Before they left, they were advised by family and friends that at least one parent should stay back to care for Amina. But, hopeful of their decision and believing it was for the best, they both left their daughter, Amina, under the care of her aunt, Aunt Mariam, and her uncle, John. At first, things seemed promising. Aunt Mariam and Uncle John welcomed her, assuring Amina's parents they would treat her like their own child. They had no children themselves, so Amina's parents trusted their care. Amina's parents even left them a small amount of savings meant to cover her school fees, food, and other needs until they could send more. But after they left, Aunt Mariam and Uncle John revealed a side Amina hadn't seen before. Amina had always loved school. Her books were her treasures. She loved reading the stories over and over, and she cherished the idea of learning new things. But soon after her parents' departure, her aunt told her she wouldn't be attending school anymore. When Amina asked why, Aunt Mariam brushed her off, saying, "You're too clumsy and slow. School isn't for you." One day, Amina's teacher, Mrs. Okoyo, became concerned about her prolonged absence. She came by the house to check on her, asking Aunt Mariam why Amina had been out of school for so long. Aunt Mariam lied easily, saying, "She's not suited for school. She doesn't listen and can't keep up." Amina, who stood by quietly, wanted to cry out that it wasn't true, but fear kept her silent. Mrs. Okoyo looked directly at Amina and spoke softly. "Amina, you're always welcome back to school." But, helpless and afraid, Amina could only nod, holding back tears. As the months went on, Amina's life grew harder. Her aunt began forcing her to do all the chores in the house. From scrubbing the floors to washing clothes, Amina worked tirelessly from morning to night. She was given only scraps of food, and sometimes she went to bed hungry. Her tiny feet outgrew her shoes, causing painful blisters, but Aunt Mariam refused to buy her new ones. She simply didn't care. One evening, Amina gathered the courage to ask her aunt, "Aunt Mariam, could I go to school, please?" Aunt Mariam looked at her, her face twisted with anger. "School? And who will do all the work here? School is for children with good parents who care, not for you. After everything we do for you? Just be grateful we let you stay here," she snapped. Tears welled up in Amina's eyes. She had dreams of learning, of growing up and becoming something. But with each passing day, those dreams seemed to fade. Amina also became the target of her uncle's cruelty. He often reminded her how useless she was, comparing her to her useless parents. He told her, "You don't deserve school, food, or care." Each word sank deeper into Amina's heart, making her feel small and worthless. She became a shadow of the happy girl she once was, keeping to herself and clinging to her worn-out storybooks as her only source of comfort. In the absence of love, Amina found solace in those pages. She read her storybooks over and over, even as the pages began to tear, and she would imagine herself as one of the brave characters who overcame impossible odds. But her strength began to wane under the relentless cruelty. Her punishment was swift, a slap across her face that left her cheek red and stinging. Uncle John often added to the cruelty, taunting her, saying, "You're as useless as your parents. They left you because they knew you were nothing." One afternoon, Aunt Mariam received a phone call from a relative with devastating news. Amina's parents had been involved in a car accident overseas. Both were critically injured, and medical treatment was costly. Auntie Mariam's reaction was cold and selfish. Instead of comforting Amina, she muttered to Uncle John, "If they had stayed here, they wouldn't have brought this trouble on us." Amina, overhearing, felt her heart shatter. She longed for her parents, but her only reaction from Aunt Mariam was resentment. She held on to her storybooks, feeling as if the last bit of light in her life was dimming. Unable to cope with the challenges abroad, and now burdened with medical expenses, Amina's parents sold most of their belongings to pay for their treatment. Meanwhile, a neighbor from Abune had noticed Amina's suffering and contacted them, explaining how badly Amina was being treated. Realizing their mistake, they decided to come back home to care for their child. But things took a turn for the worse before they returned. Amina became sick, weak, and pale from doing so much work with little food. One afternoon, Mrs. Okoye, a neighbor, came by to collect some money Aunt Mariam owed her. When she entered the house, she found Amina lying on the floor, breathing heavily and looking very sick. "Amina!" Mrs. Okoye cried, rushing to her side. "You're burning up!" In a panic, she tried to get Amina to sit up, but the girl could hardly move. Her heart filled with both worry and anger as she realized that Aunt Mariam had likely ignored Amina's health for a long time. Just then, Aunt Mariam came home, and Mrs. Okoye confronted her. "Do you want to kill this poor child?" she shouted. "How could you let her get this sick without taking her to the hospital?" Aunt Mariam tried to brush it off, saying Amina was just pretending. But Mrs. Okoye insisted they take her to the hospital immediately. Aunt Mariam had no choice, and they rushed Amina to the hospital, where she received proper care for the first time in weeks. The doctors were angry at Aunt Mariam's neglect and told her that Amina needed love, food, and rest to recover fully. Her small body was covered in bruises and scars, evidence of the neglect and abuse she had endured. When Amina's parents finally returned to Abune, they were horrified to see their little girl. She was thin, her face pale, and her once bright eyes were filled with sadness. She hardly recognized them at first, as her spirit had been crushed by the months of mistreatment. Amina's parents wept when they saw her. They embraced her, promising to make things right. With the help of the same neighbor who had informed them, they reported Aunt Mariam and Uncle John's cruelty to the local authorities. The police and the traditional council members listened carefully, as Amina's parents shared everything they had learned. A neighbor also testified, speaking of the times he had seen Amina with bruises, or when she limped from wearing broken shoes. Aunt Mariam and Uncle John tried to deny everything, claiming they had done their best to care for Amina. But the evidence was clear, and their lies didn't hold up. The council found them guilty of neglect and cruelty, sentencing them to prison. Amina's parents focused on rebuilding her life. They enrolled her in a nearby school where she could finally learn all the things she had dreamed of. On her first day, Amina wore a clean uniform and held a brand new notebook. Her eyes sparkled with hope as she walked into the classroom, her heart full of excitement. Her parents worked hard, taking up small jobs to make ends meet, but their love and presence made all the difference for Amina. Slowly, she began to heal. She made new friends, learned to read, and even shared stories with her classmates. Her spirit returned, and her laughter filled the home once more. Amina's journey was difficult, but her strength and her parents' love helped her find hope again. Her story reminds us that kindness and care are powerful, that no one deserves to be mistreated, and that true family is built on love and support. Moral of the story. Amina's story teaches us that we must protect and care for those who cannot protect themselves. Kindness, love, and support are what make a true family. Her parents learned the importance of being there for her, and together they rebuilt the love and happiness that every child deserves. The end. Thanks for watching. Did you enjoy the video? Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more. Drop a comment and share your thoughts. See you next time.